addiction, depression, heartache, anxiety, the oppression of the closet. These are some of the themes we see over and over again in what is a massive physical expression of our collective mental health and well-being, the annual Snowflake exercise at Out and Equal. For the last 3 years, we have collected thousands of these handwritten notes on which each person privately writes and then crumples up and releases a secret or a fear that they have been hiding in the workplace. It is profound to witness. And we need to continue evolving, unburdening people from these heavy secrets and the weights of shame and misunderstanding around mental health. Employers that can navigate these conversations and set up supportive programming will fare much better than those who lag. One estimate puts the cost of mental illness at $16 trillion by 2030, and estimates of global loss of productivity around 12 billion working days per year. This is clearly not an individual challenge with one-off solutions. Mental health is a global economic, social, and political challenge that will require the might of every entity. Employers must be part of the solution. It is my pleasure to welcome some of the leading minds in the field to this panel. Simon Blake of Mental Health First Aid England, Ralph Deschabert of Brown-Forman, Amanda Lisi of Accenture, Jennifer Fisher of Deloitte. We are also thrilled to have Amit Paley of the Trevor Project moderating this session. The Trevor Project is the leading national organization providing crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to LGBTQ young people under 25. Amit has overseen rapid expansion of the organization's reach in innovative use of technology to reach young people. Thank you all for being here.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Amit Paley. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the Trevor Project. We are the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ young people. And I am so thrilled for this panel because the reason that the Trevor Project exists is that suicide and mental health are public health crises in this country and around the world. And yet there is still such enormous stigma and taboo around these topics. Suicide rates for all people have increased in the United States over the past decades, and we know it's particularly acute for LGBTQ people and specifically LGBTQ youth. LGBTQ young people are more than 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers, and a recent study from the Trevor Project found that there are more than 1.8 million LGBTQ young people who seriously considered suicide in the past year just in the United States. We also know that support and affirmation and acceptance and openness can make a huge difference in improving mental health and saving lives. A recent Trevor Project study found that LGBTQ young people with just one accepting adult in their lives were 40% less likely to attempt suicide. So we know that support and the power of acceptance really make a difference. And that extends beyond just young people into workplaces and environments like yours. At the Trevor Project, mental health is a major focus of the work we do every single day with LGBTQ youth, but it's also part of our work with corporate partners and making sure that environments at work are supportive and focusing on mental health and suicide prevention. So I am just thrilled to be moderating this conversation with some incredible leaders today. Each of you bring unique perspectives and best practices from your companies and organizations, and we're going to dig into all of those right now and share them with our audience. So first, can each of you talk a bit about your role and how your work intersects with mental health and well-being? Why don't we start with Jen first?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so happy to be here today discussing this topic. It is something, mental health and mental illness is something that is incredibly personal to me as a person that has lived with and struggled with anxiety for many, many years. And so it's a personal passion of mine, and it is something that is a top priority for Deloitte, which is where I work. I'm the Chief Wellbeing Officer for Deloitte. So that means that my team and I create the strategy and drive innovation around all topics related to work and life, health, and wellness. We strive to empower Deloitte's people to prioritize their well-being so they can be at their best, not just when they're at work, but in their whole lives. And so our well-being strategy, it is called Empowered Wellbeing because it's all about empowerment. It does include 4 elements, which is body, mind, purpose, and financial health. So it really is a holistic approach to health and well-being, and it's embedded throughout the organization in everything that we do throughout the life cycle for our employees.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Ralph, why don't we go to you next?
Well, I come in a very different kind of way. Jen, I really appreciate what you were saying, but my approach is, I am the head of diversity and inclusion for a company called Brown-Forman here in Louisville, Kentucky. And as we think about, as I think about this work, everything we do has to encompass the well-being of individuals in our organization. But at the same time, we've learned that we need to start having conversations about mental well-being as well. And that's where I think we begin to enter into this. So we are, unlike Deloitte, which is very far along on their journey, we are very new to the journey, but we're very committed to making a difference and making sure that we can have these conversations in a very open forum.
Thank you, Ralph. Amanda, why don't we go to you next?
Hi, yes. So similar to Ralph, I lead inclusion and diversity at Accenture. So mental health and the Mental Health Ally program is part of the portfolio of activities that we have. And what's been quite interesting to me most recently is some of the science around inclusion, which shows that if we don't have that strong sense of mental well-being ourselves, if we don't have that good psychological capital, we're not able to be inclusive of others. We're not able to extend that empathy. And so I love the intersection of mental health with inclusion and diversity. On a personal level, when I was 14, my cousin, who was the same age as me, came out and tried to commit suicide. Fortunately, he was not successful. But the stats that you called out, Amit, were really, to think that we're still in the position today where many young people don't have support holistically from their families and friends and schools and colleges really cuts deep. So really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Amanda. And last but not least, Simon.
Yeah, equally delighted to be here. I'm Simon Blake and I'm from Mental Health First Aid England, which is a social enterprise. And our mission is to train 1 in 10 of the adult population in mental health skills and knowledge. Very specifically 1 in 10, because we believe that will create the cultural change that you alluded to is required, to remove the stigma, to remove the taboo, and to ensure that people feel confident talking about mental health, understand signs and symptoms of poor mental health, but also know where to get support. So that's the day job. I'm also the deputy chair of Stonewall, the LGBT charity in the UK, and like the States, our stats are awful. It's shameful that we still, 30 plus years after the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, are not creating safe environments for all children, young people. And so this is incredibly close to my heart, and I think it is it's really important in the workplace for the people in the workplace, and we've worked with about 20,000 workplaces over the last decade, but remembering that they're also parents and uncles and aunts and friends, and so as well as their own mental health and well-being, their peers, the people they manage, they're also, the work that we do within workplaces ripples out into communities and has untold benefit when it comes to that community impact as well.
Well, thank you all for sharing. And it's clear we have an amazing group of leaders with different perspectives and experiences. So we're very lucky to have you all and excited to hear more about your perspectives. So, in some prior conversations we've had, some of you have talked about supporting mental health in your workplaces. Can you speak a little bit to that, and specifically, what do you mean when you talk about mental health in a workplace context? Why don't we start with Jen again, and then we'll go to Simon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. And I think in the workplace, one of the things that we try to do at Deloitte is very specifically talk about mental health and mental illness. And this is likely something that we picked up from mental health first aid. Mental well-being is fine to talk about. We don't want to get stuck on the words. I view mental well-being as some of the practices that you put in place to help your mental health, to stay mentally healthy, to stay mentally fit, if you will. But I think it's really, really important to talk about mental health and mental illness for what it is. 1 in 5 adults will struggle with their mental health in any given year, 1 in 4, depending on the stats that you look at. And trying to call it something else, while it's well-intentioned, doesn't really, in my mind, help to remove the stigma that we need to remove. I think it's also important to recognize we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. And we move along the spectrum throughout our lives, and there will be things that happen, the death of a loved one, the death of a pet, the loss of a job. There are many, many things, a global pandemic that can impact your mental health. That doesn't mean that you will walk away with a mental illness. Some might not. Either way, it's really important in my mind, and what we strive to do at Deloitte through a series of education, tools, resources, but really focusing on our culture, creating that safe space, allowing people to show up authentically and ask for help if they need help. And that it's so incredibly important, because without the culture component, all of the programs and tools in the world, and education in the world, it's not going to matter, because people won't feel comfortable taking advantage of it. So in my mind, we need to move from away from just awareness, or from awareness to full literacy around what mental health and mental illness are. Our brain is connected to our body by much more than just our neck. And it's really important that everybody, does what they can to understand, because they're going to be touched by it, whether it's themselves, somebody they love, somebody they work with, somebody that they know.
I would agree with everything that Jen has said, and Deloitte in the UK has done some amazing work around trying to quantify the economic cost of poor mental health and poor behaviours about looking after our mental health. So presenteeism, leaveism, etc. And in 3 years, it rose from 36 billion as the cost to 42 billion to the cost of the economy. So that financial sort of quantification, in a country which is obviously much smaller, I think is important. But there's also, of course, the moral imperative to do something well, and the business imperative about connected, engaged employees. So I think for me, workplace mental health is much bigger than the Wellbeing Initiative. It's the way that we design and think about jobs. Is the job manageable? Is it rewarding? Do we have relationships which people are able to connect and engage with? Does it work, as well as reducing stress in the workplace, which I think is one of the things we do? Does it create joy? What is the sense of purpose that people have got? When you think about the types of people in the types of positions, do you have diverse people represented in senior roles? Women, people from different ethnic backgrounds, people with different sexual and gender identities. And if you do they all get paid at the right level? All of these things contribute to the well-being of the collective and the well-being of the individuals. And then you've got all of your programs of activity which are about connection, about making sure people have got support, about making sure that people know that they can talk about mental health and well-being. So I guess for me, let's think about viewing everything through a mental health and well-being lens, because it's the right thing to do, but because we know it's got business benefit, and that where we can have connected and engaged workforces who feel as though their mental health is supported, they feel as though through the DNA of the organisation, it's set up and designed to help us to be as well as we can and to access support when we can't. That's well-being in the workplace. It isn't the event that happens on World Mental Health Day or Suicide Prevention Day, which are all really, really important. But it is the way that we think about business from top to bottom. And I guess just the last thing to say is that we would never expect managers or people to do lots of the things that we expect them to do without the training and support to do it. But somehow we expect people to manage people and to support their mental health, often without the training and support to do it, and the time to do it well and to do it justice. And we've got to change that quickly.
No, and Simon, I want to build on that, if you don't mind, because I think that you're on the money in this regard, and that is that there's an expectation that managers, for example, will somehow or other have the skills and abilities to deal with issues as it relates to mental health and mental illness, and they aren't equipped to do that. I think in many of our organizations, for so long, for so many years, we spent such an incredible amount of time with saying, we don't even want to talk about those issues. Those things are outside, leave them at the door, all of those cliches, all of those things. And the fact of the matter is that people don't leave them at the door. And the fact is, we've got to become much more capable, competent, and qualified at being able to deal with the issues. And part of it is also, I think, giving managers permission to have the conversations. And that's important as well. So I'm in full agreement with you. And the things that you were saying earlier, Jen, completely aligned, completely. But it has been such a taboo. And unfortunately, and you talked about this earlier, unfortunately, the taboo oftentimes leads to suicide. It leads to disastrous consequences. And I'm engaged with a couple of folks here in Louisville who have just lost children. And it's stunning. I mean, it's absolutely stunning. And they wish that there was a voice in the business community as well as society in general. So this topic is it's timely, and in fact it's maybe timely is the wrong word. Maybe it's late because it's overdue.
Yeah, that permission to managers and leaders and of any kind in an organization is so critical, and we hear it so much. And Simon, we have mental health first aid at Deloitte in the U.S. as well, and it has been such a powerful and valuable program. Number one, just to demystify mental health and mental illness, but then create that comfort in that structure. Obviously we're Deloitte, we're a bunch of accountants and consultants. Amanda, you could probably relate to this, but we like frameworks. It brings us lots of comfort. But the conversation's never going to be a comfortable one. But knowing how to have the conversation and knowing that it's not your role to diagnose somebody, but to really be there for them, help get them to the right resources if that's what they need, and knowing how to access those resources. It's been a game changer for us. So just thank you for what you all do as an organization, Simon.
Thank you all for sharing that. And I love that line about maybe this is not timely, maybe we are too late. That seems certainly so. And the lateness being exacerbated by so many things going on in the world today. One of them being the incredible shift during this pandemic of COVID-19 to work from home for so many companies and organizations. that's had so many impacts. It's further blurred the lines between work and home. So many more people are reporting higher levels of stress and burnout and mental health issues. Hoping you could each share how you are personally balancing your home and work lives during this pandemic, what your organizations are doing, and what tips you can share to help people make sure that they are supporting both their own mental health and well-being as well as their colleagues and their organizations. Why don't we start this time with Amanda?
Okay. So yeah, I couldn't help sort of have a smile when you said, what are you personally doing to balance? Because I think, I'm a bit work in progress here. And, every day with the homeschooling and the extra housework, as well as, very busy work days, I can't say that I've cracked this and mastered it. But I think, some very basic habits have really helped me in terms of making sure I'm getting the sleep, making sure I'm being quite disciplined with my diet and reducing things like alcohol and caffeine, and then just finding time to do something that gives me joy. So that could be just playing badminton with the kids, which we like to. We put up a basic net in the garden and we like to do that, or just bouncing around, with the kids and doing a pillow fight, or, things like that. Just making sure that every day there's some of that really sort of present joy in the house. From a corporate perspective, we had launched, not knowing about the pandemic, but launched at the beginning of the year, a virtual program called Thriving Mind in partnership with Thrive and Stanford Medical. And what was incredible was to see that 127,000 employees have done that over the last 6 months. So, that's over a quarter of our employee base, but it's incredible about how much this was needed. And it was just so of the moment, completely by chance. But, that was building on our mental health ally program and the mental health awareness that we've done around the world. But I think, as what everybody is saying, is this really, really is a very, very important conversation right now, and our employees are feeling that. And what that allows people to do is to go deep on their biotype, so recognizing 7 different biotypes and solutions that are different for you according to your biotype. And so that helped me to get a little bit deeper on the things that would really help me, because I think, unfortunately with this, there is no one size fits all, and we do need to get into the conversations with people and really learn about where they're coming from. So that's a few things, Amit.
Thank you, Amanda. And I appreciate the candor in saying that you are a work in progress on this. I would assume many people listening to this are in the same boat, and talking about that is, I hope, inspiring and helpful to people that we're all working through this in different ways. Ralph, why don't we turn to you next? So, Ralph, I think you're on mute.
That's always the case. It's we're learning in this process, aren't we? That talking and you're on mute, and in a lot of our work, we've said go on mute and even turn your cameras off when people are talking. But nonetheless, where we are again, as I shared earlier, we are new into this space, and so one of the things that we're clear about is that at Brown-Forman we have a culture of caring, but what we also know is that talking about mental health, it's new for us. And we have to make sure that we help people to get more comfortable with the topics, with the conversation. And one of the things that we've decided, and right or wrong, I'm not entirely sure about this, but we've decided that we need at least one senior leader to really be the voice of this work. And because all of the research that we're looking at really speaks to how important it is to have some senior leaders who are willing to share their own stories. Mm-hmm. And so we put out a call, and every single executive leader has volunteered to be involved and to share their stories. Mm-hmm. So now what we're doing is we're working on how best to kind of leverage the support that the the leaders will give to the organization. But we realize that we've got a collection of mental health offerings. But what we also realize is that we haven't done a good job of communicating what's available to our employees. And I think in part because we just didn't talk much about these issues. And so we're going to begin to communicate our mental health programs. And what's interesting is that we're actually going to start today. So this conversation is kind of interesting because we actually have September 14th, we're starting. And we know that we've got National Mental Health Week and so on, but we're going to start this work, and we're actually going to begin to engage with our ERGs, our employee resource groups, to help us to think about what support would look like across various demographics as we kind of do this work. And so we've got the typical sort of benchmarking and other things that we're doing, but that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Thank you, Ralph. Simon.
So on a personal level, I share a horse and I have a dog and I run. So from how do you sort of manage yourself, those things, it's very hard to do anything office related when you've got a dog, or if you've got a jump in front of you, or you're running. So that's sort of my thing, and I've managed to protect most of that through lockdown. I think there's three things which I'm really interested in this, which is how we acknowledge the impact, and if we don't address it, the potential longer term impact of trauma as a result of what's happened, but celebrate the adaptability and the community spirit and the ways that people have adapted into all sorts of environments. And I think there's a really important bit for us to try and get right here, because we know that there is increased anxiety, but we also know that for many people who've been looking after children, the commute has made life easier, even though homeschooling may have been a slightly different issue. Amanda, I didn't have to do any of that, but it's important, I think, to look at all of the evidence, and some of the evidence is showing that for some people there were elements of life that got better in this period, and if we can capture those and work those through and change work for the better, deliberately by design rather than because of a pandemic which forced changes, I think that we could have create a long jump here as a result on the back of the pandemic. The other thing which I think has been really interesting is that the way that work conversations have shifted. So if you think about half an hour meeting that you used to have in the office, there would be sort of 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning, weren't there, where people would rattle in and people who liked each other would ask a question, and you quite quickly settle down and do the work. Whereas now it feels as though there is much more of a uniform, let's check in with everybody first, and we'll still get the work done in half an hour, but having checked in with people, having gotten to know people a bit better, maybe it only actually takes 7 minutes to do the bit of the business decision. And for some people, they're like, well, maybe we can do it in 7 minutes. But actually, the relationships are the work. And I think that we mustn't go backwards from this. That checking in with each other is a really important part. And then just the final thing to say is the bit which does worry me is that everything is focused on the pandemic. And actually, people have been experiencing loss, bereavement, divorce, separation, racism, homophobia, all of these things have carried on underneath it. And if we're truly to be thinking about the mental health of our workforce and our communities, we need to know them well enough to know about the issues that are really impacting them. And particularly because COVID's going to be around for a really long time in one way, shape or form, we have to get better understanding. So if I look at our team, the impact of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and the determination to be anti-racist has put as much in terms of their experiences of being at work as COVID has. ultimately, of course, I hope we get to a better place, but we have got an interim sort of period where it is going to be more difficult in workplaces for some people as a result. So I think my plea in all of this will be COVID lens is really, really important, but actually a mental health lens and a people's lives are complex lens is even more important for all of us as we move through this next stage. Otherwise, we risk missing people for whom actually coronavirus may not be feeling like has big impact, but something else is.
Such an important point, and I want to come back to that in just one moment. First, wanted to give Jen a chance to respond to this question on how you're personally dealing with this and what the organization is doing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So how I'm personally dealing with it, probably very similar to Amanda. I appreciate the work in process, aren't we all? For me, it's, eat, move, sleep, and find joy in every single day. And I'll kind of harp on the sleep piece because no one else has talked about it. But, sleep is so critical to every aspect of your well-being, but so critical to your mental health and well-being. And admittedly, being somebody who lives with anxiety, it has been more difficult during the pandemic. And I agree, we don't want to just focus on the pandemic, but I have had to be very intentional about, how I structure my day, what that looks like, using my calendar as my friend, being very open with anybody that I work with, what my needs are, but that I will also get all of my work done. I just need, the time and space and permission to do it in my own way, in a way that works for me. And so, if anybody wants to talk about sleep and contact me about sleep, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. But, quality and quantity sleep, look it up. There's an incredible book called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker, if you're a sleep geek like me and you want to learn more. In terms of Deloitte as an organization, taking into account so much of what has been said, we have really recently launched a program that is focused on team and account level behaviors and norms. And so what do I mean by that? It's really embedding, well-being into the way that we work. And so having teams that work very closely together on a day in, day out basis decide what they want those new norms to be, because the way we work has shifted. And this was a vision for our future of work prior to the pandemic. So to Simon's point, it's not because of the pandemic, but the pandemic has certainly accelerated it. And so, allowing teams to decide, do we have no meeting Fridays? Do we block 2 to 4 p.m. on Wednesdays for training? What is our focus work time? What are our standard work hours? What are our expectations around, email response times? How do we communicate with each other should there be an emergency, knowing that email is not a great vehicle for communication because it means that people have to always be on. We've really been encouraging, 25 and 50-minute meetings to give people, that break in between meetings. We've been encouraging intentional, like Simon said, intentional time set in a meeting or set otherwise to just check in and say, hey, how you doing? How can I support you? What are the 3 things that are most concerning to you right now? And of course, my favorite question that I ask people, which I admit is kind of weird if you don't know them really well, but I love to ask people how they're sleeping, because typically if somebody tells me they're not sleeping well, then that gives me an indication of how they're doing, and I can help support them in different ways. So that's a little bit about me and what we're doing at Deloitte.
Thank you. I love that tip on asking people how they're sleeping as a way of checking in a different way. I wanted to go back to a point that Simon raised. The pandemic has had a huge impact on people, but there's a lot else going on in the world since the murder of George Floyd and the increased national and global reckoning about systemic racism. And we know that Black Americans have been, and Black people globally have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. We know that mental health is stratified, and that there are inequities along lines of race, gender, income, sexual orientation, gender identity, and so many other dimensions. Just to give one example, the recent Trevor Project study found that although Black LGBTQ young people experience similar rates of depression and suicidality to all of their peers, they are significantly less likely to have access to professional mental health care. And we see these inequities in so many different contexts. So let's talk about some of those inequities and some of those disparities and what can be done to address them and hopefully eventually close them. Simon, let's start with you.
I mean, I guess the first thing that we have to do is acknowledge that they exist, isn't it? And actually, it is still really interesting how many people believe that we are, in a meritocratic and more equal society than all of the evidence demonstrates. I guess the most important thing is clearly in the early years for children, in schools and in youth groups and for specific spaces for them, for representation on TV, for there to be access to very good sources of quality information. And also, if you link to workplaces, and I point again that it isn't just people who are at work. Parents, we know lots of organisations do lots of things to support parents around particular issues and to help them to talk with their children to address. I mean, I guess all of us. Whatever our identity, whatever our commitment, if we're committed to social justice, if we're committed to removing inequity and creating equity, whether that's around race, whether that's around sexuality, whether it's about intersectional identities, we all need to be very, very clear about what being an ally means. It isn't a label that you can describe yourself as, that it is a set of actions which are based on a set of decisions that you will make, and sometimes they will be proactive decisions which you're making in the way that you're thinking about your work and organising work, and sometimes they will be responding to other people and to challenges, whether those are internal or external. I guess from a workplace perspective, and forgive me if I'm not wholly answering your question, but I hope this still holds some relevance. We have spent a lot of time talking to colleagues who are people of colour, Black colleagues, about the experience of being at work at the moment and being expected to perform, and what support can look like from the organisation, from managers and from peers. And we'll be publishing some guidance around that from a well-being perspective in the next week or so, which we can certainly link through out and equal through the summit. But we have to tackle the causes, don't we? We so often try to address the symptoms, and the causes we know are systemic. They are based on prejudice. They're based on taboo, and our commitment as people who are interested in mental health, who are interested in equality, who want workplaces to be fair, is to always be looking at what we can do to address the inequities which are both a cause and consequence of mental health disparities. And the States and UK have similar track records in many areas of disparities in mental health that none of us are proud of. But too often it becomes about blaming the individual rather than about addressing the systemic issues which cause it. And I think all of us have to get better at learning to recognise and to understand the role that we can play as individuals and as organisations in what are big systemic structures which are set up and designed in order to achieve the outcomes that they are achieving. It's not that things are wrong, it's that they were set up and designed to achieve those outcomes. So how do we dismantle those in a positive, proactive way to enable everybody to achieve?
Thank you, Simon. Ralph, why don't we turn to you next?
Well, and Simon, when you were talking about systems, one of the systems that needs to be dismantled is something that I call the heterosexual conspiracy. And part of what happens in that is that we have to be able to tell the truth about the heterosexual reality and the impact that it has on so many of our LGBTQ people. It's stunning. And I see it at the high school level, where I see young people struggling with not wanting to be gay. I see parents carting their children off, to make sure we have therapy because there's something wrong with my child, and there's nothing wrong per se. And yet, on the other hand, there can be many things that are wrong because the heterosexual conspiracy is so deeply entrenched in all of us. It is so profound that it does create problems. But to be able to tell the truth about that and to be able to then to dismantle it is crucial. And I think the other thing that I think is important, Maya Angelou said something, and so I'm going to paraphrase. It won't be quite right, but it was something along the lines of, there's like no greater agony than sort of having this this untold story that's inside of you. And so with COVID, with the work that's going on in our organization, one of the things we do is we check in with one another. I shared earlier that Brown-Forman is a company where we care. Well, our ERGs, our employee resource groups, what we do is we actually have calls now. And what we're doing is we're just checking in. And so, for example, the Latinx group, they're having calls, but they're having calls with Mi Familia. And again, it's not about the business. It's about the business of you. How are you feeling? How are you doing? And we do that with each of the groups, whether it's our gay group, whether it's our Latin group, our Black group. It's so important to do that. How are you doing? And they know, everyone knows that on those calls, there's an expectation that there's genuine caring on the other side of that screen, and that it is safe to communicate how you're doing. And some of those calls have been very emotionally provocative, and yet important because our employees are feeling a sense of connectivity.
Thank you, Ralph. And I want to come back to talk more about some of the work you've been doing with ERGs. Want to give Jen or Amanda a chance to answer as well before we turn to that.
Yes, I'm happy. Like. Oh, go ahead, Amanda.
Okay. No, I was just going to build on what Ralph said about the ERGs or employee networks. I think, during this time, they really have come into their own. And, when you talk about the disparities in mental health care, for example, in the different groups, we have found going to the employee networks and really working through the employee networks to understand how they want to approach mental health and well-being has been really, really important. And having that, that intersectional discussion around mental health and ethnicity and racism, or mental health and the LGBT community, and recognizing that for some communities, my husband is actually Jamaican heritage, and with a very large family, he's actually one of 9, and with a history of mental illness, it really was not a topic that could be talked about. And so recognizing that there are some cultural differences as well as financial and economic disparities, and how you need to overcome things in a very bespoke way, rather than just a sort of a program that brushes over everybody. But I wanted to just come back to the point you made about heterosexual conspiracy, Ralph, because my 12-year-old daughter heard me use the term straight, and she got very upset because she said, well, what is straight for one person is not straight for another person. And it really just reminded me that sometimes the simplicity of childlike language gets right to the point. And it's the fact that, for so many people having to justify the way that they feel versus as all being accepting that we're all very different. And so I think there's something really powerful in what you're talking about, and really putting that on the table.
Thank you, Amanda. And Jen?
No, I probably don't have so much that's powerful that has been said. I think that the point around cultural relevancy and gender identity relevancy, probably, as you know best, Emmett, is so important, because there's just the system's broken. I mean, the mental health care system is broken for all of us. But if we think it's broken for some of us, it is seriously broken for other groups. And understanding that as a leader and an organization is critically important, because there's a lack of trust. People keep it in the family, if that. And a lot of times it's not even kept in the family, or it's just accepted because there's not an awareness that there might be a mental illness there. They just think it's oh, my crazy uncle, or it's just something that has kind of persisted in the family for so long. And so for us, we have been very we've tried to really promote an understanding of these differences, and promote culturally and gender identity relevant resources. That's really important too, because when people do get to the point of asking for or seeking care, if they go to a counselor or a therapist that does not understand where they're coming from, and kind of the history of the broken system, it's like a terrible first date. You're not going back, right? And that lingers, and that prohibits them from seeking care for a long period of time. And so having resources that understand what it's like to be LGBTQ, what it's like to be BIPOC or Black, what it's like to live these lives is so critically important, especially at the first date, because we know it's so hard to take that first step, that if you take it and it goes bad, that person might kind of be lost to the system, as broken as it is, might be lost to the system forever.
Mm-hmm. Or even damaged by it, which is the worst case scenario.
100%, yeah.
Just a very quick point about the heterosexual conspiracy. Did you call it, Ralph? I can't quite remember the terminology, but in the UK, and I suspect it's similar in the States, that over 50% of people who have been out and confident at university or prior to going into their first job go back into the closet at their first employment. And it just makes me think about, actually, when you are worried that you are going to be found out, you are on hypervigilance, which means that your brain is doing too much work, which we know causes stress. But it also means that you can't be at the edge of your creativity, because you're worried about, is it going to sound camp, or am I going to use the wrong pronoun for my partner, whatever it is. So I do think there is something which is, even before the first date, or thinking about the first date as being in your selection criteria. Here we value this, we value people's identities. We've got resource groups because we want you to feel welcome. We've got this support in place, but bring all of yourself. We have a campaign at Mental Health First Aid England called My Whole Self, which is recognizing that until you can bring your whole self to work, there is nowhere that you can truly have your feel safe and welcome, and as well as you possibly can do in that workplace. But if your stats are anything like ours, I think it's startling that over 50% of LGBT young people believe that they cannot go to work and be open about who they are. And I would love that to change as a first step to improving mental health in the workplace for LGBT folk.
Thank you for sharing that. And the stats are, go ahead, Ralph.
And I would also say another thing that perhaps is not stated here, but I think is important when I talk about the heterosexual conspiracy. Part of what I'm saying too is that as a heterosexual, we don't know that it's bad for us. And so there's this thing that's going on that it doesn't allow the heterosexual to engage and to connect in meaningful ways. So much so that when we're talking about how do we bridge these gaps and across gender, for example, and can we even think in a broader sense around gender? Well, at some level, I think that each of us has to get in touch with some dimension that we're not going to be necessarily terribly comfortable with. And that brings us into this whole conversation about being androgynous. And where are we in that process? And to the extent that we can't embrace others because of that fear, that concern, then at some level it is not healthy for us. And that means, therefore, that we can't be as good as we need to be for everyone in the organization. It is just that clear. And for me, this is the self-work that has to go on as we think about mental health and being healthy and well-being. What we don't understand is that it is not good for that well-being and the mental health of heterosexuals. And I'm speaking as a heterosexual and saying there's a sickness that is ubiquitous in our society that hurts all of us. And it's terrible.
It's so powerful, Ralph. And just to, I think that this is global. This is not a one country problem. To your point, Simon, some of the statistics you shared are similar in the US, and they're true for not just for LGBTQ people in terms of the impact of being discriminated against, but we don't have time to talk all about it right now, but the social science research on the minority stress model and what it is like to be a person who faces discrimination and rejection in society does have profound impacts on the mental health of people. It's a well researched in the literature, and for those who are not familiar with it, worth looking at more information about the minority stress model, not just as it applies to LGBTQ people, but minorities of many different identities. I wanted to, Ralph, you talked a little bit about ERGs before, and I understand that you have a really incredible story around the Spirit ERG at Brown-Forman. So I was hoping you could walk us through the formation of that group and talk about what it meant to the company as a whole.
Well, I don't know how incredible it is, Amit, but I would just share a couple of thoughts with you. It's a group, Spirit is showing pride in respecting individual taste. So Spirit is the acronym for showing pride in respecting individual taste. And what this group did was the group said, we are a beverage alcohol company, but we also want to respect the rights of individuals not to drink if they choose not to. And if they choose to drink, that's fine, and make sure that they're doing it responsibly. But what we know is that there's a connection between mental health and making sure that we are treating our bodies well, that we're taking care of ourselves. And so this group has come into being, and the executive leadership team supported. So think about this. This is a beverage alcohol company with a non-drinkers employee resource group. And what we do is we actually have sessions around mental health. We have sessions around suicide prevention. We have they're called elephant in the room discussions, where you come in and you put on the table those things that are important to you. And we have folks who come in from the outside who engage with us. We develop relationships and partnerships with organizations, for example, MAD or whatever, where we're making sure that we live what we say on those bottles when we say drink responsibly. What we also know is that drinking responsibly means not putting pressure on other people if they don't share your perspective with respect to drinking. And so it is okay not to drink. And what's happened is that in our organization now, every time we have a gathering, always there are mocktails available, which was not the case prior to the advent of this group. And what we know is that it's no longer okay to come and ask, why aren't you drinking? And surely you want to drink or whatever. We know better because this group has taught us an awful lot. And it's wonderful as a beverage alcohol company to be able to do that. And we all feel very good about it. And here's what's interesting. I think what's really interesting is that many of us knew that at some level we weren't living up to our values, because when we would have gatherings, sometimes there would be instances where people would drink too much, or sometimes people would go out of their way trying to fit in. And what we now are saying to them is, you don't have to do that. Mm. That's not a requirement. And here's the last thing that I would share with you. And this is kind of a lighter side of things. I had a consultant who was interested in doing some work with us. And she said, I really want to do work with you. And I'm pleased because I went online and looked at your site, and you have a non-drinkers ERG. What that told me is that when we come to socialize, I won't be forced to drink. And that takes so much pressure off of me because I don't really drink.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that is an incredible story, I would say. And I hopefully give some people some food for thought there. So over our conversation, we've been talking about a lot of the taboos that have existed around mental health, around suicide, around addiction and substance abuse, which we briefly touched on as well. And for a lot of people, those are things that you actually have to come out about because there is such taboo and stigma around them. Mm-hmm. How do you model the sort of compassionate and inspiring leadership that allows people to feel comfortable coming out around mental illness, mental health, well-being? How do you set the groundwork for people to feel comfortable doing that? Why don't we start with Amanda this time?
So, I think, and going back to something that Jen said earlier, is it really does have to come from the top. And so you do need to have leaders. And I know Ralph was talking about having people, sponsor the mental health work that's going on. But in any capacity, I think we need to have leaders who are open, who are compassionate, who are human, and are willing to share their stories. I think that really, really helps. We use ally programs as well, whichever topic we're talking about. And we find the ally programs and the lanyards really help because they sometimes they're just a conversation starter, but at least that the person that you're working with is either supporting maybe mental health or LGBTQ, and you just know that they are trained to a certain degree to help you if you get into an issue. I think Ralph said this, and I think it's a problem in most organizations is you just need to constantly be communicating what is out there, because we all do so much, but often it's not very well understood, particularly in this world where people are receiving so much information. So understanding, where you've got the we've got a first line employee assistant program now everywhere around the world, where you've got the mental health program, and then also where they can go for some more in-depth support, and then education programs for everybody, just making sure that everybody is aware. We had things like time to talk for everybody, so set aside a time where people would just talk about their mental health. How are you doing today? And programs like It's Okay Not to Be Okay. And then really having leaders who are talking about how they're feeling really just opens up and empowers everybody to do the same. So I think you've really got to create, from the top, the culture that Jen was talking about, and really allow people, empower them to share their own stories.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Amanda. Jen?
Yeah, I echo so much of that. I think a lot of it was talked about. I will personalize this a bit, and story sharing, storytelling is a big part of the Deloitte culture. For me personally, when I made the decision to speak about my own struggles with my mental health, it actually came out in a Harvard Business Review article that I wrote with my mentor, and it's 5 ways bosses can help support mental health in the workplace. And so we share our personal story of how she helped me, and actually, quite frankly, it's one of the reasons I'm in the role that I'm in today as the Chief Wellbeing Officer at Deloitte. But I remember when the article published, and I called the person that works on communications with me, and I said, "Can you tell HBR to take it down?" Because it was out. It was public for the world to see. And although I thought I was ready, when I saw it in print, I absolutely freaked out. And she kind of talked me down and said, people need to know this. People need to hear this. And what ensued was, just messages from people I knew, people I didn't know, people internal to the organization, external to the organization, thanking me for sharing my story and for being a leader that was willing to talk about a topic that is so difficult, and for showing people that you can struggle with your mental health, you can live with a mental illness, and you can have a thriving and productive life and career. And that is so important because we don't have those role models, not openly. And so I think we're starting to see it more and more. You're seeing a trend with lots of celebrities, which I think is fantastic. But we need everyday people. We need the people that we live and work with every single day to start sharing what this looks like for them or how it's impacting them. At Deloitte, we have partners that have been sharing stories of a couple that have shared stories of their children who tried to take their lives. And so it's just becoming, it's becoming more and more of the conversation, but the story sharing, I think, backed up by all of the tools and resources that so many of us have talked about today, is a really important part of creating that safe space and that culture that you want to have.
Great. I know we have limited time. Simon, Ralph, anything you want to add before we turn to our final 2 questions?
I think that captured it. I'm good.
The one thing that I would just say is absolutely talking about personal stories and in real time. So I think that sometimes people can talk about them in the past, and I've been very conscious. My mum is very unwell at the moment, but to talk to staff about that as it's happening and what that means for me now in relation to work, so that there is that sort of sense of things. And then the other is talking about how to keep well. We have a very strong strand of our staff meetings and conversations. What are you doing to keep well in this moment? And if we see that there are some people who are not engaging, then that can become part of well-being conversations, which are a very regular sort of part of it. So I think it's that important bit of trying to really spot how we can help people to think about their sleep, their alcohol, all those things which Jenny and Amanda talked about earlier, and their self-care as an important part.
Thanks, Simon. So we've talked about stories and about why this is the right thing to do to care for, invest in well-being and the mental health of our colleagues and employees. Some people listening to this will be inspired by that, and some might also want to know what is the business case for investing in wellness and well-being and mental health of employees. Want to throw that out to the group, see if someone wants to share their thoughts on what the business case is for that.
This is Jen. I mean, I would say, while the business case, I guess, in many ways seems like it should be simple, I recognize that it's not. But for us at Deloitte, we are an organization made up solely of people, and our people face off with the market, with our clients, solving their most complex problems. and not taking care of the health and well-being, including mental health of our people, just doesn't seem like a very good business decision. It almost seems like a business imperative to actually do the opposite and take care, and that's what we do. I mean, it's the right thing to do for our people, which is our main reason, but it's the right thing to do for our business, because we know that high performance, which is what we expect, isn't mutually exclusive from well-being. Actually, you need it to continue to fuel that high performance over a period of time. And so for us, that's the business imperative and the business case.
Yeah, some of our own research showed that whilst statistics are that it's 1 in 4 people who suffer from mental health issues, that if you look at particularly the younger generation, and we're about 75% millennials or Generation Z, that nearly 70% of them suffer from their mental health at some point. And then when you include people being impacted by either a family or a friend very close to them who is impacted, it's more like 90%. So I think it's becoming much more appreciated that this is not a minority issue by far. This is all of us, and therefore the business case is really sound, both in terms of employee engagement and just as we saw from people engaging and downloading the online training, how important it was to them, but also, as Jen said, the productivity gains that you get, if you want to be more ruthless about it, when people bring their full selves to work, which you just can't do if you're constantly feeling more anxious and not in that creative frame of mind.
I would say that from a war for talent. Let's look at it from that perspective. I mean, to the extent that I'm able to come into this organization and be more fully who I am, allows me to feel like this is a place that I need to belong, that I need to be in. And when we think about inclusion, we keep thinking about uniqueness plus belongingness. And to the extent that we can create an environment where it is safe for you, psychologically safe for you, to be able to talk about, share perspectives as it relates to my mental well-being. This is a place where I want to belong. I don't want to be somewhere else. So on that basis alone, it's important to do.
I can't say any better than has already been said, but the idea that we are all humans, and therefore we will all have things. Our body and our mind is a onesie, as Ruby Wax would say, and so the idea that we can believe that people are our best asset, and not have programs which try to ensure that every single person is included and welcome and feels belong as though they belong and are able to do their best. It isn't possible to say, we want to be the best in the business without paying attention to the diversity of people and the well-being of the diversity of those people. It's just not possible.
Thank you all for sharing that. So this has been an incredible conversation. You've shared a lot of perspectives, experiences, and I thought we could just end, because a lot of people I think are going to be listening and watching this feeling inspired, having learned a lot, and perhaps wondering what can they now do in their organizations to increase the well-being and improve the mental health of their team. So wonder if we could do sort of a final lightning round. If you could each share, as you talk to the audience, what would be your advice for what they can do when they go back into their workplaces, of how they can address this issue and best support their teams and employees? Let's start with Ralph first this time.
I think the one thing that I would say, and this is going to sound a bit strange, but I would say practice, I want to say positive or healthy thinking, because I think so often we just feel, for example, like we can't fail. And so to be able to have conversations in the organization about failing and rebounding, it's important. So having conversations about resilience, because we don't talk about failing very often. And I think that the whole concept of failing forward is a very important one to take the pressure off of us in order, again, to be more fully who we need to be.
Thank you, Ralph. Simon?
I guess mine would be do something. Don't wait for a fully formed strategy. Depending on what your role is, you might want to organize some training, or you might want to organize a conversation, or you might want to do something in your team meeting. But I spend a lot of time talking to somebody and saying there is no perfect approach here. There's a combination and there's a journey. So for me, it would be do anything that you think is possible, succeed at that thing that is possible, and get some people with you to then do some more things, because once the conversation starts, it takes on a life of its own. And of course, I would say, because I think they're marvelous, mental health first aiders in your organisations will be one part of a good overall programme and approach. But it really is looking at every single thing you do through a well-being lens.
Thank you, Simon. Jen?
Yeah, well, I think Simon stole mine. Do something, whether big or small. We are all able to and have a responsibility to create the culture that we want within our organizations. So if you're not aware of what your organization does, educate yourself. If you're start small, start big. Just do something. Start within your own teams, and if you feel like you are able, share your own story as a way to start to have the conversation and give others permission to do the same. Because as I said, I was scared to death, but it has only been proved to be one of the most meaningful things that I've done in my life.
Congratulations on that, by the way. I'm going to have a look at your the article when we finish today. I think make sure your leaders understand that their humility, their vulnerability is really key to this, so they shouldn't be afraid of that. I think just making sure that you've got some policies around empowerment so that people can actually take control of things, whether it be flexible working. I think Simon mentioned the fact that so many of us have been working flexibly. I'm talking to countries like Japan and India and the Philippines, where we didn't think we could ever have flexible working, and now we've proved that we can. So let's not go back from those and make sure we've got that empowerment. Education, particularly around some really practical support. So even just making sure people know how to find what is available is really important, because there are so many in all of the countries that we operate. There's so many great NGOs, partnerships that we can have, and frontline support. And then finally, I think thanking people, recognition, thanking people for engaging in the conversation, thanking people for what they're doing around this and for their sharing is really, really important. And that probably last step is the one that we often forget. So I think, that can go a long way to helping people understand how powerful. And Jen, you sharing your story, thank you for doing that, because as you say, that's probably one of the most impactful things that you've done.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's not make that mistake then. I want to extend a huge gratitude and thanks to all of you for sharing your perspectives, for being vulnerable and authentic, and sharing your personal stories. It's been really exciting and inspiring to hear what you each as individuals are doing, what your companies and organizations are doing to support employees and their mental health, especially at a time when there's so much going on in the world where it is maybe late, as Ralph said earlier, but it is required and necessary. And as the leader of a suicide prevention and mental health organization, I'm just very grateful to all of you and to Out and Equal for taking this time that we can focus on the importance of mental health in the workplace. I just wanted to share two very final thoughts, coming back to a statistic I said at the beginning of the session, that just one accepting adult in an LGBTQ young person's life can reduce their risk of suicide by 40%. That is an enormous number from a public health perspective. And being a supportive person in anyone's life can make a huge difference. It can be life-saving. And so I hope everyone listening and watching to this knows you can be that person. You can be that person in an LGBTQ young person's life, in anyone's life, who is helping to check in on them and to help make them safe. And the second thing I think is really important to say is many of you listening and watching this, you may be people who are struggling. The statistics would show several of you would be. And so I want to make sure if you are someone who is struggling and you may not have shared that yet with anyone, please know that you are not alone. You can reach out for help. There might be resources at your company. There are national organizations that are engaged in suicide prevention and crisis intervention. If you're an LGBTQ young person, you can reach out to the Trevor Project. But most importantly, I think we can all say that you are not alone, and we want to know that you can reach out for help when you need it. Thank you again so much to everyone, and hope you have a great rest of Summit. Thank you again.